Hi there, welcome back to yet another episode of Attitude Makeover. As I start the inclusion series, I want to take a moment and introduce my guest, Swathi Kulkarni, the CEO and co founder of Elda Health. I met her through a women's network group that I am part of, and I saw the passion that she comes with on the subject of menopause and the impact it has on women. And I thought it was very contagious. As I build this podcast around the rippling effect of change when you talk about inclusion, I thought this is a topic we must talk about. Inclusion in the corporate world is primarily around representation from both the women as well as the LGBTQ plus community. But I think inclusion goes beyond that to the diversity that we bring to the workplace, especially in India, with the hub or the experiment ground for diversity. And for me, inclusion is about talking about the unspoken topics. Today, I picked up a topic about patriarchy. Now, I'm not going into why patriarchy or what is patriarchy, but I'm going into really understanding a woman's journey through menopause, and can a man really include himself in this journey and process to understand what a woman goes through, whether it is your mother, your wife, or your sister, or your daughter. It doesn't matter. How much do you understand what a woman goes through during what we call that time of the month or the period, and especially closer to the menopause or premenopause phase? What we cover is everything from why is this important, what kind of an impact the country would have, an organization would have, a family would have, and an individual would have when you understand this. We then dive deeper into how does one go through internalizing the curiosity to be more aware about this. And then going into how does one change first in your own house, in your organization, and thereby is there a rippling effect on what we do with our country itself? Can we really change the patriarchal ideology around this to really create an impact? As always, this is my inclusion series, and I hope you like this conversation. This is not just for the women audience of Attitude Makeover. If I've managed to touch on at least 10% of my male audience, there is a rippling effect. And I think my job is better done here. Again, thank you so much. If you've liked this podcast, please share, subscribe, and help me spread the word around Attitude Makeover. Thank you again. Well, Swati, thank you so much. I think I first bumped into you through the women's group, and then I heard you speak, and it's a topic I am very passionate about, and I'm very, it bothers me, it angers me sometimes, and yet it is like, oh, I can also change, if not anything, just my home front. Absolutely. On how people look at it. And so I felt as we're going into the inclusion series, it's important to really touch upon the topic of periods. And 50% of India is women. And I felt like this is a very important topic to actually dwell into as a conversation. So thank you so much for being kind enough to say yes to this.
Thank you for inviting me, Saujanya. I think it's lovely to talk to women across the board. Like you said, 50% of the population is women. And I would love to sort of discuss or, any efforts in terms of making that equitable sort of an equation has definitely been my passion too. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you. I think it's a mutual exchange. Yeah.
I'm sure.
I want to go back to about 5 years back. I went with a lot of, I think that was the time when this Section 377 was really talked about extensively in India. And out of arrogance, because by then I was listening to a lot of long format podcasts, and I decided I'm going to help this transgender community by creating a podcast series on what it means to be a transgender. I call it arrogance because I went with this attitude of I'm going to help them. But then I reached out a whole bunch of them, and it's a very close knit community. Nobody responded. And over the next year and a half, luckily, I didn't stop at it because the easier thing is to say, okay,
It's not
to hell
working.
with it, they're not interested, so why am I even bothered? I'm going to help anyway. But I decided, no, I need to understand what's happening here a little more. And thereby went through a very rigorous journey of reaching out to alternate law firm which deals with these transgenders. What are some of the legal things they fight for? And in that process, then got connected to NGOs, and through them, I finally got to record about 4 transgenders. I stalled it because the quality of the audio was really bad. And hence, when I started Attitude Makeover, the idea of really having the quality of my podcast was pivotal. But the reason I bring this story is, for me, from that attitude of arrogance, I changed to, oh my God, I was so naive and uninformed. It's not arrogance, it's some sort of arrogance around the privilege that I had. To expect someone who's going through it day in, day out to then come and sensitize me on, oh, you know what, this is what it means to be a transgender. And I felt that was so wrong fundamentally for me to think that way. And it changed the way I look at it, diversified my mind in terms of just looking at it from a different perspective. And I think today's topic is exactly something similar. I want to start off with, I normally start my podcast with getting to know my guests, but I think I'll park that for a bit.
Sure.
I'll interleave it. But I want to start off with, what's the landscape of women in India, and how much of an economic, financial, and upliftment impact does women have or bring to the table from a country perspective? And if you can zoom into from a company to organization to an individual and a family, I think that will sort of set a context for why we are talking about this.
Sure, Saujanya. I think the point that you brought up about arrogance, and I would say ignorance to a large extent, right? We just know 0.001% of what the world has to offer on any topic. I mean, forget about something that we don't experience ourselves, but also certain things that we experience, we probably don't understand that completely. Now, when we speak about women, you and I being women can boast about the fact that we're women, we understand whatever happens, but unfortunately, you and I don't, And like my dad always says, my dad's a retired army gynecologist, so he would always tell us as we were growing older that a lady is a lady when she is, in the womb of her mother, when she develops a tiny uterus inside, right? So you don't look after a lady or empower her when she's grown up, or when she's a teenager, or when she's getting pregnant, or, in future phases of her lives. You look after the mother when she's going to give birth to this beautiful baby girl. So the lady is a lady from the womb to the tomb.
Wow.
And we have to ensure that we're able to empower her. Now, why India? Look at the global landscape. 50% of the population today recognizes themselves as female. And you and I also know that the woman's journey is not that easy. I think from menarche, which is the first time when you get your periods, or which we commonly call as puberty, all the way until menopause and post-menopause. Menopause is a phase when you've not had your periods for a year. For 12 months you don't have your periods, you can call yourself menopausal. I think it's a roller coaster ride of hormones, up and down. Now, if you look at the value that these hormones play in a woman's life, that's tremendous. It's got positive connotations to that. I mean, there are certain things that are sort of not that great. But I think the impact that the lady plays is huge. Now, let's take the economy, for example. And I'll particularly talk about menopausal women, because I think pregnancy and puberty, all of us celebrate across the globe, especially in India, right? But let's talk about this phase, menopause, where women are post-reproductive phases, right? So we're typically served, overlooked. Nobody really cares about what the woman's going through. Menopausal women alone contribute to around $600 billion of the global economy, because that is the spend that the lady would be doing either on her medical health concerns or productivity losses during that phase. And the menopause phase starts from anywhere between 3 years to 10 years. So the impact that a woman is playing, sort of playing in the economy is amazingly huge. You look at clinical trials, 2% or less than that is actually spent on female specific clinical trials. We're using products that have been tested on men, and we're different as women. So I think that is a huge gap today, as we speak. The impact that the woman can make is huge, but I think the care or the sensitization to us as women across age groups is actually very, very low, and it needs to, lot of effort and focus needs to be given into this area. Now, when we zoom in a little bit and look at, say, corporates, or let's talk about organizations, big and small. I run a small startup, I worked with big organizations, but across the board, if you look at whether they're your leaders or they're your reportees, right, or your peers, the value that a lady sort of adds, and I could be biased by saying it, is not just IQ, but it's also a very strong EQ that she brings into the table. No business is impersonal. Whatever you're doing, working with others, there's always an underlying sentiment. And I think women are extremely empathetic. So that is super important for us to bring into the ecosystem in terms of a diversity point of view. Even if I put that aside, 50% of our population not having not having favorable situation at work to really be productive is a big loss, not just for the company, but for the global economy. So I believe that there's a huge gap there too. People have started period leaves. We're talking about mental health quite a bit. But I think a lot of stuff still needs to be done, especially in age groups that are post-reproductive for women. Post-maternity, how do you empower women to come back to work? Body image issues. Can we sensitize men around us? To talk about how difficult it is to even get out of that postpartum depression, right? I think there's a huge gap there, and there's a huge role that companies can play. We specifically look at menopause as a phase, and I can tell you that 40 to 50% women who are absolutely equipped, they've gathered skills for 15, 20 years of their corporate life, right? Now they're at the pinnacle of success. They're waiting to get the next promotion, take the next opportunity to sort of grow. But we're going through menopause. There are some physical issues that we have. There are some mental health issues that we have. So if we don't get that support in the company, it's the company's loss. The lady is so equipped and educated. Now you want her to basically take the company and the teams together. So I think it's very important for corporates, big and small alike, to basically empower women across age groups. Now let's talk about individuals. I think as a person, I heard and knew about menopause or post-maternity issues or puberty only when I went through them, or somebody else in my family or my ecosystem basically sensitized me to that particular concern. So I think it's very important for us to educate our people. When my son was 9 years old, I sat him down and I spoke to him about periods. Of course, he didn't understand much. I mean, how much would a 9-year-old boy understand? But he had tears in his eyes when I told him that this is what happens. The first question that came out of his mouth was, does Arohi, who's my daughter, who was then 4 years old, does Arohi also have it? And how does she feel when she has it? So I had to tell him, of course, there's puberty and all of that. But I think if we're able to sensitize our kids, our partners, our parents, our team members about these primary phases of life, right, where the woman needs that support. I think as individuals, as families, as friends, as small team cohorts, we can actually make that change. And I think the change is brought up by doing these small, tiny things everywhere. So the responsibility is yours, mine, and everybody else's over here.
I think what you're also talking about is the first step towards any change, and a change that is so deep rooted in us culturally, growing up, in our beliefs, everything, starts with just being inquisitive and create an awareness around it, which begs me to which sort of redirects me to think that a bigger part of it then is communication.
Absolutely.
It's also about this is not a podcast just for women. It's more, I think, for the men in my audience group. Because again, to go back to the starting of the conversation, my realization that it was arrogance that, oh God, I'm going to help them versus, oh God, I don't know anything about this. We all have mothers, we all have either sisters or wives or some woman in our house. What are they going through?
Right.
Having that conversation.
Right, absolutely.
But that's hard as well.
It is hard, and I think we need to sort of create that ecosystem around us, to not everything you and I can experience, and I think certain things we experience through others. My dad would always tell me, as a male gynecologist, in the labor rooms, women would yell at him saying, Doctor Saab, aapko samajh mein nahi aata hai. What am I going through? You don't have labor pains. And that's true. I mean, how can a male have labor pains? But I think my dad would always tell me that that's an additional responsibility on me to be extra empathetic, to try to understand because I can't go through this. And that's exactly what we need to do. You shared your experience about transgenders. I think it must have been eye-opening, Saujanya, to even understand or to get 1% of what they feel, what they've gone through. You can never go through that. But to just put yourself in their position for those few minutes, for those few hours that they've gone through, for those few years or several years, I think it's a very humbling experience. Something that I always, when I look around, I feel privileged, like you said, that I have people who can understand what I'm going through as a woman, as a founder sometimes, because life is challenging, right? Or as an executive, as a mother, we play several roles, in our day-to-day lives. But I think there are a lot of people who don't have even the basic amenities, the basic understanding. There is a difference between literacy and education, and I think that's super critical for us to understand. So sensitizing folks, like you said, I think is very, very important. Also for all of us to go into a conversation saying, just like a child, right? I don't know anything about this. I'm here to learn from you. Tell me, let me experience even partly what you're going through. And it's only then can I even help you. I think the concept of me trying to help other women going through menopause or through puberty or pregnancy or whatever, or even empower other leaders to do better in their lives is actually nonsense, because I need to understand what they're going through to even see how I can probably play a 1% role in their journey. So yeah, I think education is important. Sensitization is very, very important. And we have had many examples, in our life so far to see what bigger role it plays, to just be open when you get into a conversation about things.
I want to go a little more to understand, I like what you said about literacy versus education. How do you define the two? Where's the thin line?
I think being educated, or rather I would say, breaking this entire concept of ignorance is what we should strive for. I mean, you could be a postgraduate, you could be a doctorate for all we know, right? But do you really understand, or are you aware of what's really happening? And I think that's basically where, are you a literate or are you truly sort of educated, right? In terms of, and education, of course, or awareness rather, let's call it awareness, because, both literacy and education have this connotation, that goes along with them. But if you talk about awareness, you and I could be talking here, but are we really listening to each other? Or are we just hearing what's happening around us, right? So I think a lot of this also comes from how keenly are you, or how intended are you in terms of learning from this conversation? And across the board, whether it's women's related issues or diversity as the topic of your inclusion, as the topic of your podcast is, Saujanya, I think to understand what inclusion means or to appreciate diversity, I think just being aware of this is very, very important.
Then comes the acceptance and the questioning of it. But first, are you informed?
Absolutely.
Consciously informed.
And are you willing to go the extra mile to really be informed? I think that's what is really important.
Yeah. And that's a hard journey, I think, because when I went through it, it required me to really carve out time, right? You're working full time, which I think I was just lucky. I have no reason to go back to reflect and see why did I go back to explore, because for me I felt it was like I was just curious because I reached about 17 or more transgenders who were out there in the news and not even one responded. And I was like, was there something I'm missing in this? And that curiosity got me to this point of like, exploring. But I think that journey is a very conscious journey of carving out time. I'm going to try and find out about this and going to read more. And the more you read, the more questions come up and you go back and clarify, strike off assumptions. It's a process, but that investment is required because it has an impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so glad there are people like you who understand this. I was talking to you about your podcast name, right? The attitude makeover is important for all of us.
Yeah.
The earlier we do that, I think the better it is for us and the world around us. We don't know how, what huge an impact it has. Even with people who are probably not directly connected to us, right? We speak about this kindness way, where, I'm kind to someone else is kind to somebody else, but that's honestly a butterfly effect. So I think just sort of figuring out what our attitude makeover is today is so important, Saujanya. So thank you for even bringing these topics to light, right? And educating people like me and the others around who are probably not as aware of the various issues that are there in the world.
Yeah. I want to now go a little more to get to know you better. As to what I normally do is talk to my guests to understand their personality as well as the core values or character. Because all my guests are very aligned to a certain set of values when it comes to this attitude makeover. So if you can sort of touch upon your journey and why and how the genesis of Elda happened, and also go into, if I strip off Elda or any of these titles, who's Swati at the core?
Lovely question. I mean, I think the thing about stripping off everything else and who are you is actually a very important aspect even for me internally. I'm Swathi Kulkarni. But what's in the name, See, I've grown up in the defense ecosystem. So we never lived in a place for more than 2-3 years. And I think that itself was a very humbling experience. My dad and mom would just pack up everything and sort of go. And my dad was in the AMC, the Army Medical Corps. And he's a very principled man. So he would make sure that we never had help at home. So we would do everything at home ourselves, and we'd see our friends have a lot of people coming in and doing everything else. So of course, I grew up with that angst that I want to be pampered too. But I think it had a huge impact in the way, we looked at life. A lot of what we did was never superficial. We would always look inside. We come from a very middle class family, and education has been the core thing that we would build. We were also taught to do whatever we're doing with utmost focus and love and affection, if I may. So I've been to almost every state, every city, every small town in the country. And, I'm also married to someone who's very fond of traveling. So we travel quite a bit. And I think every time I speak to people, I learn a lot from them. So I feel like I told you earlier, just 1% of what I can, learn along the way. So I love interacting with people and learning from them. I come from a family of doctors, so I think health was always core to what, I wanted to build when I grew up. After my MBA, I worked with a number of startups. So I really like that excitement of building something from the scratch. I think the beauty of working in a smaller setup is there is no bureaucracy. Yeah. So when you have an idea, you can just execute it as you speak. More than the business, of course, I love the business aspects of, things that we build, but I think the people that come together to mobilize the business is what I thrive to sort of, I love that. So when I see my team members happy about something, I sleep peacefully that night. When I see my customers feel better in their health, I just feel peaceful and sleep that night. But why did I start building Elda? As a woman who's gone through a number of phases, right? And I've had health concerns at various phases of my life. I think menarche puberty was relatively easy, but my pregnancy and post-pregnancy concerns were really huge. I had an abortion, I had an ectopic pregnancy, and I had appendix rupture during my second pregnancy. So we had various health concerns during that time. And that's when I realized that health is most important to whatever we do, because it's central to every role we play. I was a mother at that time. I was leading a team in the company at that time. I was a wife and so many other roles. But I really couldn't play any of them, even 1/10 as well as I would if I was healthy. And I think that's when it struck me that I need to do something in this space. It took me a few years after that to basically build Elda. But it also came at a time when I started, feeling that my body wasn't as strong as it used to be in my early 30s and my late 20s, when I would call myself much younger. Things that were very basic were very difficult for me to do. And I think it was not just about my physical health, but it was my mental health, my gynec health and everything that came together. And that's how we started thinking about building something in the women's health space. We knew that we wanted to start with one area of focus, get it right there, and then basically look at the other spaces. So we started looking at women over the age of 35. We spoke to around 250 women personally. Like you said, tried to listen to what they were saying. I went in with the arrogance saying, hey, I know about menopause. I've gone through a few symptoms. I know it all. But I had the same exact humbling experience as you did, Saujanya. Every woman's experience is different. And menopause as a phase, women are suffering silently and they're suffering alone. You'll hardly sort of, listen to people talking about menopause or sharing their concerns out in the open. Actually, nobody does that even for, periods issues or issues of, trying to conceive. So I think women's health issues have always been a sort of silent topic, but menopause more so, because your mother would have never told you about menopause. Mm-hmm. She suffered silently and she's probably expecting you to just get through it with all the pain. But it's not a 1 week thing. It's not a 1 month thing. It's not a 1 year thing. I mean, you're typically going through this for 10 years.
So 10 years.
So anywhere between 3 to 10 years. Oh. And that's the phase of menopause, right? So you can't suffer. You can't be expected to endure it. Yeah. And I think that's where we started. And we've been building this for the last year and a half. We've had 40,000 women today, who are basically working with us on menopause, talking about their problems, learning from us or solving for them. So through some health interventions that we provide. But I think leaving all this aside, the concern is that there are certain things that we don't understand. Yeah. And to solve for that, we need to understand the science behind it. And I think anything that's sort of evidence-based, driven by science becomes easier to solve. But I'm also a Vipassana meditator. I've been, I think with all the health issues that came in, and I was like, man, what's happening? Let me try to figure what my center is. And I was introduced to Vipassana several years ago. I think that's definitely been a part of my life. And they say, just observing your breath and living in the moment, right, at that very moment, opening up your mind to... Anyone can tell you what to do or teach you, but if you have a bucket or a basket that has a hole in it, whatever blessings are going to come in is just going to leak through. So I think preparing the woman to really have a nice basket needs a lot of preconditioning to tell her not to be judgmental about herself, to become aware of herself and say, accept herself. I'm Swati, I have these issues. I probably do this well, but I accept who I am, and I'm happy about it. So I think that is very, very important. I personally have experienced that. It's been an attitude makeover for me too. But I think we try to incorporate this, at Elda, when we talk to our women, we normalize what they go through, just telling them that it's okay. You're not the only one who's going through this. There are millions of women. In India, we have 150 million women who are going through menopause.
150.
Globally, there are close to 1 billion women. And Saujanya, tell me, outside of this conversation, how often have you spoken about menopause?
Yeah, I have to tell you I mean, when I do my research, so like I said, this is a conversation, it's not an interview, so I don't come prepared with questions as such. But I do my research on the topic, and I was taken aback by what I didn't know. Uh, and we don't talk about it. Maybe I talk about the pain or the cramps I go through with my friends, or now that I have a teenage daughter, I talk to her, oh, it's horrible today, kind of thing. And she then exchanges of, have you tried this? She comes with some tips of the trade, kind of a thing. But otherwise, we don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
And that intrigued me again when I heard you speak as to, wow, this we need to talk about, because I'll tell you one incident. You talked about abortion and you went through that. So my first pregnancy, I was probably the only woman in that team full of young boys or men who have just come out of colleges. And I was like a full-blown pregnant one, because I decided I'll take the 3 months after the delivery.
Absolutely.
And so when you drink hot water or coffee, the hand or the elbow would move, and they would be like jumping out of the seats asking, oh, what the hell is that? And I'm like, this is normal, don't worry, relax. And so I realized, as I'm going through phases, I'm experiencing it, and I'm not so shy about talking about it. So I'm talking, and thereby I'm sort of, now how they take the topic, or how they visualize it and how they internalize it, I felt was not my thing. But I'm going through this, you're in my team, you're my peer. So here is the true reality of everything. And for me, the second pregnancy was actually, I had the complete fallout of it in the office. So there's blood, and I was rushed to the hospital.
God.
So that was like a shocker for all the men, saying, oh my God, what is happening here, kind of a thing, right? And again, when you go through it is when you understand, oh, the mind is going cuckoo.
Yeah.
You have your mood swings, the pain is too much. And, especially if you have a male boss, to call him and say, hey, I can't come today because. It's so hard to say that, but you're going through a lot. And especially when you go through these kind of gynec complications. And I realized later that I was not alone. There are many, and they're very different things that happen, like PCOD, and each one has its own complexities.
That's right.
And when I started researching on this, I realized it's not just these hot flashes that people talk about. It's a lot of biological, psychological, and physical changes that happen, and manifests itself in different ways. So if you're a man working with me and you don't know, you can construe it as arrogance. You can construe it as, oh my God, it's so difficult to work with her. But the reality is, she's having her own battles.
Absolutely.
Right? And that was an eye-opener for me as I started. It's not like I was not aware of all of it, but then as I started researching, I realized the mammoth of impact that has on a woman, and how we're so nice as human beings. We absorb.
Endure it.
Yeah, we high endurance. I mean, we run marathons in our life.
Yeah. No, but I think the change has to start with us, Saujanya. So, when you shared this during your pregnancy with your team members, it must have taken off a burden from your chest, right? That you're normalizing it. But it was easy to do that during pregnancy, because everybody knows about pregnancy. They all know that you're going to have a baby. They know that there's a belly, that the lady's going through this and that. It's spoken about quite a bit. So I think the first responsibility is ours. Just being vocal about some of the symptoms that we go through in different phases, I think is very important, because unless we say it, how does the other person really understand, right? So I'll give you a few examples, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about what happens in menopause, and use your podcast to even educate people, men and women alike, to know about symptoms that they probably have seen their mothers or their wives go through, but never understood. So maybe I'll just simplify that a little bit and then talk about
If you
that.
want to include our camera guys,
I would
you
love
should.
to do that.
Because I think we have
could do a pop quiz
a
at the end of it.
representation here. Sorry, I'm putting
Absolutely.
both of you on a spot here.
Absolutely. I think, I'll probably simplify it a little bit for the guys and for us too, because most of us women don't know this. See, the moment we have a female hormone called estrogen. This estrogen is like our friendly female hormone. Let's call her our best friend. She's there with us for a really long time and is responsible for many, many things in our lives. We'll talk about it on another podcast, but let's talk about what role does she play in my menopause. The moment I'm around my perimenopausal phase, right, which is maybe late 30s, maybe early 40s, because Indian women hit menopause at an average around 46.
Yeah.
Globally, women hit menopause at 51. How unfair is this? Okay. It's like double unfair. The moment the estrogen level starts dipping, it has an impact on various aspects of our lives. So think about a best friend who's left you and traveled all the way to, say, the US, and you're all alone, right? So now we're more prone to issues that are cardiac related. So you'll start seeing women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, have higher BP. So estrogen was the one that was sort of protecting us. So our male counterparts were more prone to those issues. We weren't, because we had this best friend. But now she's leaving us slowly and steadily. So we're more prone to these issues. But outside of that, what happens is, starting from our head to our toe, every part of our body starts getting affected. So our cognitive health also starts getting affected. Women start realizing that they're getting a brain fog. I don't remember what I was saying. Oh, I walked into this room. I don't know what I was going to do. Doesn't mean that I'm forgetful. I'm going through bodily changes that's causing that, right? So that's one. Then there are mental health issues.
Before you go to mental, can you go a little deeper into what is cognitive health?
Yeah. So I think certain aspects that really are connected to your cognition, right? Things that you were probably able to grasp in a certain way, it starts impacting those. The most common for a layman or a laywoman to understand is, there were things that you were doing very easily earlier, which now you're finding it very difficult to sort of comprehend. Small things about brain fog. I'll give you an example of brain fog. Typically what happens is, when you have multiple things running in your head, you would have left the gas on, even in your 20s. And then you'll be like, man, women are multitasking and that's why these issues and so on. That has nothing related to the cognitive health. It's just that you're trying to do multiple things. But over here during menopause, basically there's something called a brain fog, or what we call as a brain block, right? You just forget what was happening. And this is also related to the dip in the estrogen levels in your system. So these things impact the way you work. Now this could be misconstrued saying, hey, menopausal women, can't do a great job in their corporate lives. Absolutely not. I think we are fantastically sort of equipped to do this. There are certain health interventions or lifestyle interventions that we need to do to ensure that we're doing better in this space. So that's cognitive health, right? And there are various aspects which I don't want to delve into right now. It'll become too technical. But from cognitive health, let's talk to other mental health related issues. You'll see women, suddenly getting very angry. We would have noticed our mothers do that. We do it sometimes.
As a teenager, I think, there were things getting tossed from the kitchen.
Yeah.
I've told you twice already.
Yeah.
And she's a basketball player. So things would just come and you duck and she knows you're going to duck.
So she knows how to aim.
Yeah. So I think that's another thing, right? So when we are going through this, in India, we already have teenage kids, which in itself is a nightmare. But
We'll talk about that
combination
too.
is a deadly combination.
Yeah, it is a deadly combination. So the woman's going through all this. She's getting angry. She suddenly starts crying. So you'll find that lady coming in, having a regular conversation, and you'll see her start crying. And it doesn't mean that she's not a strong woman, right? I mean, it's not even like she's crazy. So you'll see some partners saying, yeah, my wife's crazy, man. I mean, she just gets angry. She's PMSing throughout and stuff like that. That time of the month for years together. I mean, Poor guy. But yeah, this is what it is. I think those mental health issues are really serious. Again, these are all related to several changes that are going through your body, right? The other aspect is your physical issues. There are gynec issues such as hot flashes and so on. We've only heard about this. If you watch some series, the recent series, right, they'll talk about this lady sitting under the fan, under the AC and still feeling hot. It's not a joke. I mean, imagine you're put just close to a barbecue for some time and then you're pushed out somewhere else, right? And you're moving, you're sort of traveling from this place to another. It's not easy. You're in Dehradun and you're still feeling hot. It's a real problem that people need to understand. There are solutions for each one of these problems, Saujanya. But the first step is to be aware that this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's not just nothing. Menopause is not nothing. It is a real problem that needs to be solved. Then there are other gynec issues, which people typically don't talk about. These are urogenital issues. Very important to speak about. There is vaginal dryness because the estrogen levels have dipped. So the moisture in the private parts has reduced. Now, what happens due to vaginal dryness? First, there is pain during sex. So couples fall apart during this age group, because the lady is not able to talk to her husband and tell her what's happening. The lady is also having body image issues. Then there is urinary infections that happen very frequently. There is something called urinary incontinence, which is urine leakage, which I'm sure none of you guys would have ever heard of because nobody talks about it. And what is it? A lady in her mid-40s, 50s or mid-50s, she's not able to control her urine, which means that the moment she sneezes, this happens. The moment she laughs, this happens. So women quit their jobs. They don't step out of the house. They're constrained inside the house because they're embarrassed that this will happen. And this is real. This is real. This needs some attention to be paid to. This needs to be normalized, just like the experience you had during your second pregnancy. Imagine, I won't sort of call it similar, but this is really embarrassing, right? Women go through this and people around them should sort of be sensitized to this. Women also start having belly fat. Typically, the men have this belly, but women during their menopausal age start having belly fat around.
Really?
So we move from an otherwise a pear-shaped body to an apple-shaped body, That's also something that the woman starts feeling very conscious about, especially with her partner when she's going out. Can I dress like this? Because my belly is showing, right? I'm putting on weight. I'm eating the same thing, I'm exercising, but I'm still putting on weight. Why? So this is normal. Talking about it is normal. And overall, what people realize is, why is this lady so tired and lethargic? She's always like sleepy. She's sleepy in the day, but she can't sleep at nights. Sleeplessness is a big symptom for menopausal women. And there are several, 40, 50 other symptoms, but I'll need a year of podcast to say those. But overall, I think what I'd like to say is these are real problems. And it's not just the woman who's going through it who needs to vocalize this. I mean, I speak about it unabashedly. There's no shame in the fact that I'm aging. I'm becoming wiser, right? I'm vulnerable. And I'm learning from life that these phases happen. There is menopausitive in this, right? I don't get my periods, let's say. A menopausal woman doesn't get her periods. I don't have to worry about taking my pads here and there, right? A lot of menopausal women, post-menopause, enjoy their sex life really well because they're not worried about conceiving. So there is menopausitive stuff with it. But I think there's a lot that happens during your menopausal years. You need to be sensitive to yourself. You need to love yourself and you need people to understand what you're going through. So I would actually tell all menopausal women and their spouses and their family members, in the audience that please be supportive. It's not nothing. It is serious, and you need to take care of your women. They've done so much for you throughout your life. It's time to give back for sure.
Yeah. There's so much I want to ask you. But I want to ask you both. Was that a aha for you both? Sorry, putting you on the spot.
Personally, I wouldn't say aha. I mean, I expected that because my mom went through quite a few complications and she had to, be in the hospital for a lot of times. God. She did surgery and then something went wrong with her surgery.
Oh my God.
There was a mistake that happened, so she had to have another surgery to correct that. So while she was in Bangalore, so it was quite a big thing. So I think that period itself was like, in some ways, educational. I don't know every specific thing about what all went on with her body, but I could see that with her, it was quite a challenge for her to get past that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, like now, it's not an aha moment, but I kind of like understand like you were talking about, like having a teenager. My sister was about like 16, 17 when my mom was going through menopause, and they used to have real crazy fights at home. And I really, like now, I think like maybe if I had known what my mom was going through, I probably would have been a little more sensitive instead of being like, oh my gosh, this is happening again. Like, why do I have to like, bear witness to this fight and this tension in the house and stuff like that. Yeah, I think for sure, at least now with my sister, I can at least be a little more sensitive, I guess.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. I think this is true. If you don't understand that there is a problem, how can you even empathize or be supportive? So I think it's the onus of all of us to educate people, even youngsters. Like my son now knows about menopause, of course, because his mom is running a company to solve for concerns there. But I think it's important to just sensitize people, right? And I'm sure, both of you will go speak about this to at least another 3-4 friends of yours who will probably be more sensitive to their mothers, their aunts, their wives at some point in time. I think it's very important for us to just talk about all these issues, Saujanya, quite openly.
Yeah.
That's where the change starts. That's where the attitude makeover will start happening across the board.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was when I started Attitude Makeover. So I want to tell you a little bit about me. I think I'm a very, what's the right word? Ambitious person. But I didn't go after job titles. But I was ambitious about figuring out or learning and understanding the big picture. And that's where the ambition was. And throughout, I felt like I'm never going to retire from the corporate world. I'd probably, grow up into something really big there. And I think last year, and after I went through your research, I sort of am drawing the strings together and tying it together, I guess. Last year, I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. I lost a dog. The maid who lived in my house for 14 years got married. So she was my solid support system. She left. And then, COVID, I lost a couple of friends, good friends. And
Sorry about that, yeah.
it really, I don't know, it hit me. And I can now understand what really happened. I don't know if I'm going through menopause, but to your point, at 46 that I am, it is something that's happening. And so I can sort of understand what you're talking about in terms of how your mind goes really cuckoo sometimes. And you're not able to control some of these things.
Absolutely.
And that's when I started the journey of self-discovery. And why I'm bringing this is, I think we as humans go through 4 phases of life. Your childhood, your early years of adulthood. But the 40s is when you're rediscovering yourself, or it's called the reactualization phase. And ultimately, it's your, 50s or the last layer, and life expectancy is actually increasing as well.
Absolutely.
So there's more to life, and that is why you see a lot of women being more vocal about some of these in their 40s, because they've lived it, and then now it's like, fuck it, I'm just going to speak about it. Screw
Absolutely.
you. Right?
Absolutely.
But does it really have to come to that stage, or can we start, are there small wins that we can start having? If we have to have this conversation, for example, at home, like if you're, I don't want to ask you to be a woman and look at it from that perspective, but if you're a man listening to this podcast and you want to bring in this change with yourself and in your own family, because it starts there and your family is also struggling as a result of it, how do you go about? What is your first steps?
Yeah, I mean, I liked how you framed this question, Saujanya, because it's actually it's a very deep question, right? I mean, we're talking about not just as a woman, as any person who's there. I think at 46, I'm pretty sure. By the way, the average menopausal age in India is 46.
So I'm gone past, but
Not gone past, but I think you probably a few experiences that you're having are quite related to menopause, right? And you're right, we're not aware of what happens to us. And sometimes the way people tell us what's happening, we don't understand what exactly is happening at that time. So I think definitely talking about this during different phases really helps. If we really want to make a change in the way we're looking at either menopause or at any phase of a woman's life, just understanding that every phase is important is the key to it. Whether you're in your 12, 15 years, when you're just hitting your puberty, forget about women as such. I think every phase of every human being's life or every living being's life is super important, and we play different roles, during that time. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but in cultures where ageism is connected to wisdom, women actually face less menopausal symptoms. But in cultures like ours, where ageism is not really respected, especially as women, that is where women suffer from these symptoms even further, because there's a social or a cultural bias or a burden that we carry.
Does that come down to your financial independence? Where is this? I'm trying to understand ageism to wisdom, I can understand. But why are we looked at as ageism is not wisdom? Where does that?
I think it's because of the way women are brought up in India, especially. And I don't want to generalize this, but if you look at least until this last decade, right? There's a particular age to get married, there's a particular age to have children, and the burden is on the woman, of course, because we are the ones who can bear children, right? But I think that becomes that becomes a responsibility of the woman. So I was having a drink with another friend and we were talking about it. We're basically baby producing machines, right? And at the end we become cows, feeding them.
My first delivery, that's exactly what I told my husband. I feel like a cow. Can you just stop this?
So I think that's probably what women typically have sort of been visualized at, So until the pregnancy, you'll see the entire family, mobilizing everything for you. But the moment the baby is born, they're also focused on ensure that the baby is eating well. And I'm sure you've heard this even with other families. The baby's lost weight, you're not feeding her or him properly. The baby's not putting on weight, so everything is around what the mother's doing for the baby. And this happens. So I think that's definitely something that we need to change, because we're not baby producing machines, right? We're human beings and we have lots to contribute outside of just producing kids. I think that's changing, and that will change a lot with our kids' generation. I see that changing already. I think that bias between men and women should change for sure. We spoke about patriarchy, in our initial conversations. 40s, honestly, Saujanya, it's a beautiful decade for women.
Yeah.
Most of my friends who turned 40 in the last 10 years are changed human beings from what I'd seen them earlier. I think there's there's an attitude makeover there too.
Yeah.
I think some of us, we feel like we've done so much for everybody, and this lady's suddenly woken up when she sees she's hit 40, and then she's like, I'm going to change my life after this. So she feels empowered. But it comes with a combination of other symptoms also that she goes through. So I think my recommendation would be that there needs to be a balance from the very beginning. You can't go from just contributing to the family, selflessly and just doing everything for everybody else to becoming this rebel and saying, I'm not going to do anything at all. There's always, like in Vipassana, they tell us, be centered. Then you need to have your equilibrium, or you need to find your center. It has to happen across your ages, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all the way up to 90s. So I think we need to change that equation, and it's changing as we speak. But educating our men or male counterparts is equally important. There's a beautiful poem that I don't recollect by Rumi that talks about why is 40 so important, and I'll share that with you on a separate note. But it talks about why you take 40 lives to become what you are. So this 40 number is so important for a woman, right? So I think your 40s you should cherish, and you should prepare yourself for the life ahead of it. In your 50s, you're probably, late 50s, you're anyways going to be post-menopausal. You won't have to worry about your uterus, producing something every month. You're a free bird. You're also out of all your menopausal symptoms. So I think the life there is then you're living it for yourself, for self-actualization or realization, for another attitude makeover, because most of your responsibilities are sort of done at that age, right? And you're actually living to see what is it that you can feel within. Some of us start doing it from a very early age, but most of us get to the stage in their 50s and so on. I think overall, the responsibility that you, me, and the guys here have is to ensure that we're able to look at it as a very sort of an equitable lens. It's not about a woman or a man. It's just about the fact that the responsibility is everyone's. Biologically, there are things that we can do which our husbands can't do. But outside of that, everything else is an equal responsibility, right? Whether it's bringing up the children, cooking at home, or going out and working. And you spoke about financial stability is very important. Yeah. I think it's very important to feel independent. It doesn't matter how much you earn, but to feel that, I have an identity outside of being my kid's mother or my husband's wife, or even the CEO of a company. You asked me about stripping everything out. I have an identity of how I feel, my principles, my values, very important. And it's important for a human being. It doesn't matter whether you're a male or a female or, whatever you relate to, or either or neither. But I think it's very important for us to understand that none of this defines us. At the end of the day, we need to really figure, what our center is.
And it's got a rippling effect, right? Like when you have a woman who is very much aligned with her individuality, it's not just her that is changing, it's the entire house.
Absolutely.
It's the entire relationships, or her 6 degrees of connections that she's got. Everywhere you should start seeing this, and it's got a rippling effect on the nation itself, I would think.
Absolutely. I would say that the lady is the center of the family. I mean, tell me one family where the lady is not the one who makes most of the decisions. So in our healthcare ecosystem, the woman makes 75% of the decisions for her family's health. She's the one who's fending for her kids when they're not well. She's the one who decides whether there should be a diagnostics test done, whether the husband should go for another cholesterol checkup or should go to the doctor. The lady does that. The lady also decides how the relationship of the family with the other family members should be, or with the friends should be. She's the one who brings emotion into the family. Look at an organization, and I can count and tell you that I've had great male mentors. A lot of my senior managers and my mentors have been men. But the few women that, have mentored me have a very special place in my heart, because they were just able to get my emotions. And it's not about my being a woman and the responsibilities that I have as a woman, but any emotion that I had, they could just get it. I think they're so perceptive in terms of, understanding how the other person's feeling. So whether it's the house, or it's the organization, or it's the country. And I'm just like in the UK, I hope that we have many, many other leaders, women leaders who are able to bring the heart into what they're building across the board, right? So I think it's very important for us to get these women to play different roles. And it'll be a makeover for the world, if you're able to get that done.
So one curious question when I was doing this research is, I have a feeling that when we go through this journey of phases, men go through their own journey of phases. Do they experience menopause?
So there is something called andropause. Quite honestly, it's sort of a debatable topic. But men, I think, go through something called a midlife crisis. You'll see your husbands
Some
at this age.
crisis they'll go through in life.
Finally. So you'll see them going through this. They'll come back home one day and they'll say, I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? I think it's just that you've lived for 45 years of your life. Now you're bored. You're like, I want something different. And that's probably it. Andropause is a very debatable topic. I'm no expert on it, so I can't really share, what that truly means. They definitely don't have this rainbow of hormones, playing in their systems as we do. But due credit to men, I think women are a lot more expressive. Like if you and I, catch up on a cup of coffee or a drink, we'll probably share a lot more about how we are truly feeling without as much inhibition or guardrails around us. as probably the men would, right? Men are not as expressive, at many times, and there are some guardrails. So even the challenges, I think the challenges that they face are a little bit more difficult because they're not able to verbalize it or really talk about them as easily as we do. But the other thing is we've got like 20,000 times the problems that, an average human being would have because of the extra hormonal play that's going on in our lives. So yeah, they do go through some phase, but I really don't know whether it's hormonal or whether it's just natural boredom that they go through.
What a nice problem to have, right?
I'm just bored. I can't do anything else. I've had no periods. I haven't had time
I have my
give
friend
birth.
leaving me now very soon. I have to prepare for that, and you're just bored. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the first step in that case is just being curious and creating awareness for yourself, and then having this open conversation. Now that's in the family front. But if you're a leader, especially if you're a leader defining policies for your company, and this is a struggle. Many companies are really struggling to bring people back to work, and many companies are really struggling with women in more leadership roles.
That's right.
And more meaningful leadership roles. So this is then something that could have a larger impact if you just understood what's happening from a woman in that phase, like in your 30s, and it sends two messages. Hey, I'm inclusive in its true sense then
That's
against
right.
just numbers. And I really value you as my employee, so I'm going out of my way here. And there's a relationship, there's a trust and a respect in the relationship. So if I'm a male leader responsible for something, or even a woman, because my awareness on this whole, subject was, I would say, 10%. And, just going through that to understand what one goes through in all the ologies, the psychology, the physiology, and all the ologies of the body of that individual, it makes me wonder how much of an impact it could have if we could just change the perspective from a number-led conversation to just an input-led conversation, which is like a handshake. Okay, like for example, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. When I was in HP and that pregnancy was going through, I think I was feeling so hot. It's a lab which had this whole AC with all these machines. I worked with printers. Mm-hmm. So you have these fusers that blow off. So you really need cold spaces. They made an office for me in that space.
Wow.
Because I was feeling so hot. And they said, I hope you're okay. And they got a fan for me. They kept a fridge later on. It is an experimentative thing of, she's going through this. Let me work with her to see how it can change. And as I started
really nice.
doing that, men would come and say, "Tere liye ek fridge bhi aa gaya." Right? But they're also getting aware of that. And so the next time someone was going through it, it was not like, oh, this is new. And so that's like an outcome, shifting from an outcome or a number-based concept to a more input-based concept of, I'm going to understand this. I'm going to learn through the women. And I'm going to bring in policy changes, especially work from home or the hybrid stuff. Really works for people like us because there are days when you just can't get out of the house.
Absolutely.
It's not like I'm not functional. I can do my job. It's just that I can't get out of the house. The cramps are just horrible for me. So I need to keep drinking hot water. I need to keep doing certain things. It's not conducive in an environment like that. So how does one, being in that kind of a leadership role that could create impact, change that mindset and bring in policies that help? You've been working in this space. What's been your journey, and is there a right formula there?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the ideal world, and then we can probably talk about what can be done and what is possible right now. See, Saujanya, the ideal world is that companies really make this an important issue that they want to solve for, right? Just like we keep talking about increasing the top line, ensuring that we optimize the bottom line, revenues, these hazard metrics that we have, the KPIs and KRAs, right? I think this should be one of their KRAs. How do you ensure that you have more women moving from mid-level to senior level positions? How do you have more women board representations, right? I see so many companies, big companies, trying to figure out how do we get this lady to come to a board position, right? How do we empower the lady to do that? So it all starts again from education. We should have education sessions or webinars or workshops for employees across the board to educate them about menopause. We've done that with several companies, by the way. So Elda has collaborated with several big and small companies to do menopause workshops. And mind you, it's not just menopausal women who come to attend these sessions. There are a lot of men in their 40s and 50s who come. There are young girls and boys in their 20s who come to say, hey, I want to know what my mother goes through. And this really helps, the ecosystem by itself.
The starting point there is the curiosity.
It's a curiosity. So I think it's a corporate or the company's leadership's responsibility to ensure that the awareness curiosity is built. To tell them that, hey, this is important. It's as important as writing that code. It's very, very important, because only if you're able to educate yourself and your counterparts can you actually be productive. So I think women in their 30s should be absolutely aware of what's coming up in their lives rather. Like we're told about pregnancy even when we're in our puberty ages. People keep telling us pregnancy hai, you need to eat healthy. We all know. But nobody knows about menopause.
After pregnancy,
no one knows. So in our 30s, we should all be equipped to know what's coming up. Our husbands have to be equipped. Our children have to be equipped. And this education needs to happen from a company point of view, outside a company point of view, but it's the leadership's responsibility to speak about it, for sure. Now let's step into your 40s and 50s, when the lady's actually going through perimenopause and menopause and postmenopausal issues. Very important for companies to come up with leave policies, healthcare programs that actually enable the woman to do this. Now we spoke about the symptoms of menopause, but I'll quickly talk to you about the solutions for menopause. Healthcare interventions primarily include medical interventions. So if you have severe problems, you may have to go on to an HRT or an MHT as we call it. They are hormonal therapies, and they're good. They're not bad. And they're helpful for some cases. In some cases, they're not. So let your medical practitioner decide, and you trust the person for doing that. Leave that aside. Most of us need lifestyle interventions. Eating healthy, exercising every day, a combination of cardio plus weight training, mental health, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, peace of mind, right? Ensuring that your diet is balanced. You need more than balanced, because at this age, you're anyways not absorbing as much as you were earlier. All these things should be enabled by companies, even in terms of education as well as empowering their employees. So what happens is a 45-year-old woman will not come and say, this is my resignation. I could have been the VP or the CXO at your company because you've invested in me for 20 years. But it's all a waste, because you haven't helped me when I had hot flashes. You still expected me to come to my company, and there was no education and awareness. So I couldn't call up my boss and tell him that I have this issue. So you didn't normalize it for me. You haven't given me the ammunition to fight it. So it's not just the individual's loss, it's also the company's loss. So I think companies have to have a sort of a two-pronged approach to begin with today. Start educating your employees about menopause. Have one session in 6 months. 18th October is World Menopause Day. I think everybody should talk about it, right? So I think overall just education and awareness of things is going to be very important. And the second one is providing programs for your women. Today there are fewer women in their 40s and 50s who are working. But I'm pretty sure in the next decade, you'll see a huge representation. We see 20-30% women in this age group who are working. 50-55% women will start working, in the next few years. Financial independence has become key. Children don't want their mothers to be at home and not treated equally by their fathers. So, you have teenage children, you'd see how protective they are as much as they fight with us. They want to ensure that the mother is empowered, she's energetic and so on. So you'll see a lot of women coming to work, not just because the woman wants to work, because the ecosystem around her is becoming more and more supportive. And I think it's high time that corporates take notice of it and empower these women to do so. You want more women representation on your boards? Support them. Menopause is not nothing. You have to support your women.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're talking about various interventions than just the intervention of, I'm going to just create a conducive environment for women to come. There's a lot more to that than, because you need, I'll give you an example again, right? So one of the things, it's a occupational issue is these bone pains. I forget what it's called.
Arthritis. No, not arthritis. I hear what you're talking
Got
about. You're always typing. I
yeah.
forget the name too. Yeah.
What is that?
Mother's thumb?
That also is mother's thumb.
No, it is a tennis thumb or something like that. It's something to do. Tennis elbow.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
a
it's
mother's
called
thumb.
mother's thumb. Oh, I'm curious to know why that name. Anyway, so what some of the organizations I worked in did is they had on-call doctors. They had doctors coming in, so you could just go and then slowly they started observing data sets to that point of, input-based outcome as against outcome-based
inputs, yeah.
changes. It's a very different way because then they started saying, oh my God, there's so many people going back on this. So we need to look at then the ergonomics of the company and how do we go about. That's a good company where you can show care and trust and respect in different ways. And it's not just about the car you give or the title I give.
Absolutely.
It's a lot more than that when it comes to employee experience and the culture you build. So I like that bit. What I also am curious to know is, we talked about an organization. Now, a lot of our men are working in these organizations. It's got a double impact if we actually also talk to them, because it then means that you're systemically bringing changes to homes and families. And that has another implication because you're not only bringing that change at home, we as Indians, especially the working class, support an ecosystem of our own. There are maids, there are drivers, there are, a whole lot of helps that we support. It percolates in its own natural way downstream as well. Help me understand, one, as a company policy, how do you make this inclusive from a man's point of view? And then how that then can be trickled as something you take back to your life as well. Have you seen that happen? I'm a big believer of one person can really think of a change and impact a change. It'll trickle, it's drop by drop, but it is worth the effort. So I'm curious to understand, even if one HR person changes the policies to impact this and takes it as a case study, it's a good example. I'm curious to understand, have you seen this and how it's changed from the men being impacted and thereby the trickling effect?
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example, Saujanya, just to personalize my experience. One, all the women that we meet, come back and tell us, can you please tell our husbands what this truly is?
Yeah.
It's really important,
Yes.
because they don't have to explain themselves over and over again. When a doctor goes and tells them, yaar, ye sach mein serious business hai. It's not as a बीवी मजाक नहीं कर रही है, or she's not just throwing a tantrum. It's really, this is really something she's going through. So I think it definitely helps educating the men. Men should feel empowered that they're also making a difference, in their women's lives. And those women don't necessarily have to be their wives, their colleagues, their team members, or anybody. One of our investors is a male. He heard this idea and he said, I want to put in money here, right? And count me in, because he's seen many women in his cohort, who've gone through this. So he felt empowered, or he felt obligated rather, to empower other women to do better. So I do think that men make a lot of difference. My team is, of course, 85% women and 15% men, but those 15% men are making such an impact to change the lives of so many women. So
I'd like to see that equation change, especially when it comes to women and diversity and inclusion as a subject. When you go
You
to
see more women.
Yeah, when you go to Women's Day things, and I, as much as I want to do things there, I also hate it because it becomes like, oh, we women coming and talking about women, right? And you'll see like a trickling effect of a few men. I'd like to see equal participation.
that will change, Saujanya. Quite honestly, that will slowly change, because today what was happening is we became a minority at a workplace, right? Now that's no more there. It's very, very inclusive. Actually, it should become, rather, that change should happen very quickly. And I think if we're able to, so I keep telling, even our customers or even the team, that this is not about women. It is about the cause. We need the world to succeed. And it can't succeed if we don't support each other as men and women. in our household, if I start talking about feminism, very strongly with a negative connotation, true concept of feminism is actually very neutral. It's very positive in the way it is. I think as long as we're able to take both men and women together, the impact will be much higher. So one way of encouraging, this time when we did the Women's Day campaigns, we told all the corporates that we worked with that we're not going to do a women-only attendance. We want your men to come in. We did these sessions. For example, we did a session about sexual health with a male gynecologist and a sexual health expert. And we said, bring your husbands together for this webinar. Let them ask the questions that they have. So I think just opening up the conversation about it, right? Let the man also listen to what's happening. And put the responsibility or share the accountability. Rather, don't put the responsibility on the male, but share the accountability or share the responsibility together, right? And I think that's when the change will happen. It isn't about, so today we're 85% and 15%, clearly because more women connect to this idea. I've had interviews where I've interviewed men and they're like, what is menopause? I don't understand this concept. I don't want to join you guys. But the men who've joined us, we have a male co-founder too, are the ones who very strongly feel about this. And their entire families have changed, men and women. So you spoke about this trickling effect, right? So every employee in the organization today has at least educated hundreds of their family members, if not anything else. So I think there's going to be a huge ripple effect. And we're just beginning that journey of educating people about inclusion and diversity across the board.
One last question around this is, these conversations, and you talked about accountability versus responsibility. Most households, the responsibility, especially of just the upkeep of the house, is a woman's responsibility.
That's true.
Right?
Sadly true.
I hate these jokes that men send about my wife and marriage. I hate these jokes that men send about women in mood swings and that time of the month. I hate it when men say, oh, you know what, my daughter or my son, I don't know how, maybe 7, 8 years old. It shows a lot about how inclusive you are in just everything in the house. It shows who's taking the heavy load at home. When you have that as a majority or a major portion of Indian women go home and cook while they're working in the house and take care of homes, the education of the child, to your point, taking the child to the hospital and everything else. It's a little different in my house, and probably because it's a childhood friendship that I've got, and so it's easier to talk. But it's not that case in many homes. When you have that, to then sit across and really have this conversation, it requires a lot of gumption.
Absolutely. And I'll quote a personal example here, Saujanya. This is very close to my heart. So my husband and I are also not childhood friends, but we met, at our first workplace. And I would like to, say that we have a very equal sort of a relationship, right? Where there are no gender biased roles that we play. Neither of us cooks, by the way. But if we have to, both of us would cook. We clean the house together. During those COVID years, everybody in the house worked, whether it was sweeping, mopping. There were no special, roles and responsibilities that we played. I think the only unique or special role I played is childbearing, because of course the man can't do that. But it's an outlier in the society. Yes. So I'll share an example with you. I went to ISB after my son was 2.5 years. And when I applied to ISB, of course, my parents were very encouraging. My in-laws were very encouraging. But when I went to work and I said, hey, I'm going to quit because I'm planning to do my MBA. And at that time, a lot of people came and told me that, why are you doing this? You have a child. You've got to look after the child, right? And, how nice is your husband? He's allowing you to do this. And I was really angry for the longest time, not just on them and the world. I was angry with my husband for no reason. I was like, how dare people feel that, you are more privileged than I am. Why can't I study? Why should you allow me, right? And even during my course of that 1 year at ISB, my professors were extremely renowned folks. My friends, my batchmates who were doing some fantastic work across would always come and tell me, you're very lucky to have your husband, such a good man. And when I'd ask them, why are you saying this? because he moved from Bangalore to Hyderabad. He stayed with me on campus. He was working remotely. He would look after my son. He'd take him to the daycare and come back. He did 90% of the work for that 1 year. And I had to hear this over and over again. You're so lucky, that I started believing that I'm so lucky, that I'm privileged. Until a stage when my husband then did his PhD and I moved to Bombay. I left my job at Google because I had to, I decided Google, husband's better. Let's leave Google, move there. Not a single soul came and told me, Swati, you're so great. Your husband's so lucky because you supported him. Not a single soul, Saujanya, including my own parents and in-laws and the only one who really appreciated me at that time was my husband, and he was extremely sort of supportive. But I think people don't vocalize this. Of course, my family felt really proud of me, that I did this. This narrative has to change. I think this really needs to change. We need to appreciate each other, and everybody needs to play the role that is needed at that moment. Right? If work has to be done at home, you've got to do the upkeep of the house. If your wife's out on a conference or is going for a board meeting, right? You've got to take up the responsibility. So I think this is really important, and as a part of your inclusion, you should interview men to see how they're able to get that sentiment in, right? Yeah. I think we're 1% of the households, not just in the country, probably we are 0.001%, but even in a city like Bangalore, if you just had to suddenly sort of visit people's homes, very rarely would you see that the men and women are really contributing to everything in the house together. Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely a change we need to make. And hopefully our children are looking at us right now. I was going to say that. My son doesn't feel like it's a male's job or a woman's job. I mean, they know that their mom needs her break. When I have my periods, I can't move. My first day is really difficult. So everybody in the family, sort of pitches in. My daughter knows that, there are certain things that she'll have to do. Either ways, whether she's a woman or a man doesn't really matter. So I think the next generation, at least from our households, is going to be a very evolved generation. They'll be very sensitive to each other's needs, not just people who specifically relate to male and female, but the general sort of gender neutral concept will start coming in, and we'll recognize each other as souls and human beings rather than saying you're a woman, I'm a man, and whatever.
This one I'm deeply opinionated and passionate about because I believe that, especially when you have children, they're like sponges, they observe it. If you have a boy growing up and you don't see the father really caring about some of these things, right, you're sort of carrying the generational patriarchy forward.
Absolutely.
And you need to break that. You need to break that chain. And it's not the responsibility of just the woman. It is the responsibility of every individual of the family to break that change. And for that, first you need to believe in it.
Absolutely.
Which is where the awareness comes in. Swati, I'll thank you first of all for this lovely conversation.
My pleasure, honestly.
I have a bunch of more regular conversations I have as part of Attitude Makeover. I don't think we went into the real deep of strip off your titles and founder and all that. Who's Swati? If you can talk about who's Swati, I think it sort of summarizes. I have a feeling of what words describe Swati, but I'd love to hear it from you first on who's Swati. That's the first one. And then I'll ask the other two.
Sure. I'll talk about myself as a soul because you've stripped off all my titles and how I look or what I do or how I behave otherwise. I think I'm someone who likes to celebrate every moment. I like to celebrate life. I think there's goodness in everything that we do. So Swati is someone who feels for others. I often see myself, putting myself in their shoes. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm an eternal optimist. I honestly don't connect to any title or role that I play because there's nothing to be boastful about in any case. I'll go back to Vipassana. We talk about impermanence of life in that. Life is transient. It's absolutely impermanent. we cannot connect to what is superficial or materialistic. We have roles to play in our life, like the Bhagavad Gita says. But at the end of the day, it's about how we experience every moment. So you put me in a rural household, farming, I'm still the same Swati, trying to enjoy that moment, connect with people, experience what they're experiencing, because I can take a million lives, but I can't still experience, what so many people around me do. So for those few seconds of just being connected, truly connected to the soul of the other person is meaningful for me. So irrespective of whatever my role is, I think celebrating life, being optimistic about it, and understanding that life is impermanent. The goods will go, the bads will go, the highs will go, the lows will go. I think what's important is just to stay centered and be at peace.
I love it. I love it. So many things I can associate or relate with. Totally love it. My second question is, what does attitude makeover really mean to you?
I think attitude makeover is life for me because, you had a makeover at one particular time, right? I mean, that was a milestone for you. I think for most of us, Saujanya, attitude makeover is a transient thing. We keep having these attitude makeovers. There is one big attitude makeover where we're like, okay, this is the change that we need to do. But every day we're having a slight micro attitude makeover. And you're talking about kids being a sponge, but I feel I am a sponge, So for me, attitude makeover is that a sense of being that sponge and learning from you. There are a bunch of things that I learned from you today, by the way, and I feel like I'm going outside of this conversation as probably a little bit of a better human being than what I entered this conversation with. But I would like to take a few seconds to really if I have to put words and describe it, I feel attitude makeover is something that you can't see physically, superficially. I could have walked in a sari, I could have walked in a skirt, but the attitude makeover is more internal. So I would say attitude makeover for me is basically what's more internal. It's not even a personality, but it's what you believe in, your principles and values. I was talking to you about doing this show for teenage kids, before we started. So I would say that is attitude makeover, right? Where in every phase of your life, you're able to reinvent yourself, rediscover yourself, and continue to learn from people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is more for my branding, but I think you articulated it more beautifully than what, if you look at my website, it is like one blah, blah, blah word. But I love the way you articulated it because
Thank you.
Part of it is like the guests represent a certain value stream that I believe in. So it's not about, I just was there at the right time at the right place. It's about my journey. It's why I believe in this. And, I to your point, I'm an optimist and I believe in change and how it can really impact more than one.
What is life if you're not an optimist, no, Saujanya? Huh? Every morning you wake up, you know that there's something beautiful waiting for you. The fact that we're able to breathe itself is a gift.
Yes.
What beyond that? It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters, right? Yeah.
My last one.
Sure.
What are some takeaways you're going away with? There's so many I've got today. For one, just understanding menopause itself, right? And connecting the dots. But what are some takeaways you've had from this conversation?
So I'll be absolutely candid about it. I think your personal journey itself is a big takeaway for me.
Wow.
The way you've spoken about the way you were working earlier, there was a life-changing moment for you, and I'm assuming it was the last few years, the few losses that you've had. So I've had these experiences too, but I think some of these life-changing moments basically move you to become a better version of yourself. So it reinforced that when I spoke to you. So one of my bigger takeaways is that, some things happen for a reason and then you become a better version of yourself. And I love what you're doing here, Saujanya. It's a blessing for so many people, so I think that is a big takeaway for me. While you were asking me some questions, I honestly got a few more ideas about how, we could spread the awareness about menopause, especially from the corporate point of view, I think that's a big takeaway for me. While you spoke about the ripple effect starting from one person. So I go back re-energized with that, new focus or energy, saying I need to do this with the other 50 companies that I've been speaking to. We are doing it with 15. Now it has to be 50. It has to be 500 tomorrow. So I think I go back with that renewed energy and enthusiasm. So thanks to you I'd really like to thank you for that. The biggest takeaway here is that your team is fantastic.
All right, guys.
And I really, I think I really like the, the style of conversation. We spoke about this in the past, that just having a soul-to-soul connection and speaking makes a huge difference. Even if it's a 5 minutes chat, you feel like you've known that person for the longest time. So yeah, this just reinforced that it's important to speak your mind and not figure, how to wrap that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Swati, thank you so much. Thank you. This means a lot, you carving out 2 hours to actually come and have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, guys. So thank you for inviting me and setting up the entire stuff.